Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of General Santos City as Manny Pacquiao sat quietly in the back seat of his black SUV. His calloused hands, weathered by countless hours of training and fighting, traced the edges of a faded photograph he had carried in his wallet for over 2 decades. The image showed a small, cramped classroom filled with wooden desks worn smooth by generations of students, and standing at the front, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair who had changed the course of his life forever. Josefina Santos had been more than just a teacher at the local elementary school, where young Emmanuel had struggled to attend classes regularly. She had been a beacon of hope during the darkest period of his childhood, when hunger was a constant companion and education seemed like a luxury his family could never afford. While other teachers grew frustrated with his frequent absences and tattered uniforms, Josefina saw potential burning beneath the surface of poverty. The memories flooded back with startling clarity as Manny's vehicle navigated through the familiar neighborhoods of his youth. He remembered how Josefina would quietly slip extra rice and dried fish into his hands after school, never making him feel ashamed of his circumstances. She would stay late to help him catch up on lessons he had missed while working odd jobs to help his mother put food on the table. Her patience seemed infinite, her belief in his potential unwavering, even when he struggled with basic reading and arithmetic. Those early years had been a relentless cycle of survival. Manny's father had already abandoned the family, leaving his mother Dionysia to raise her children alone in their makeshift home. The corrugated metal roof leaked during monsoon season, and the walls barely provided protection from the elements. Education felt like an impossible dream when every day brought new challenges just to survive. Yet, Josefina never gave up on him. She understood that his mind wandered not from lack of intelligence, but from the weight of responsibilities no child should carry. When other students mocked his second-hand clothes and empty stomach, she created an environment where learning could flourish despite adversity. She taught him that poverty was a circumstance, not a destiny, and that education remained the most powerful weapon against despair. Now, 3 decades later, Manny had become everything Josefina believed he could be. The scared, hungry boy who once sat in the back row of her classroom had transformed into a global icon, an 8-division world champion, a senator, and a source of pride for an entire nation. His journey from the streets of General Santos to the bright lights of Las Vegas had been documented countless times, but few knew about the foundational role his elementary school teacher had played in shaping his character. Recent inquiries through old contacts had revealed heartbreaking news about Josefina's current situation. Now 78 years old and long retired from teaching, she lived in a modest apartment with her daughter's family. Her pension barely covered basic necessities, and her 2 grandchildren, Bayani and Mayumi, showed exceptional academic promise, but faced the same financial barriers that had once threatened to derail Manny's own education. The irony was not lost on him. The woman who had invested so much in his future was now watching her own grandchildren struggle with the same obstacles he had overcome. Bayani, 14, excelled in mathematics and science, but worried constantly about high school tuition fees. Mayumi, 12, wrote beautiful poetry and dreamed of becoming a teacher like her grandmother, but their family's financial situation made such aspirations seem increasingly unlikely. As his vehicle approached the familiar streets of his old neighborhood, Manny felt the weight of purpose settling over him like a comfortable blanket. Today would mark the beginning of a debt repayment that money could never truly settle, but gratitude demanded he try. The familiar landscape of Manny's childhood neighborhood unfolded before him like pages from a bittersweet novel. Concrete houses had replaced many of the wooden shanties he remembered, and paved roads now covered the dusty paths where he once walked barefoot to school. Progress had touched this corner of General Santos City, yet beneath the surface improvements, he could still sense the persistent struggle of families trying to build better lives for their children. His driver slowed the vehicle as they passed the elementary school where Josefina had taught for over 30 years. The building had been renovated with fresh paint and new roofing, but the playground remained essentially unchanged. Manny could almost see his younger self racing across that same dirt courtyard during recess, often too embarrassed to join games because his stomach growled so loudly from hunger. Those school days had been a complicated mixture of shame and hope. He remembered arriving late most mornings, having spent the early hours helping his mother sell cigarettes and candy on street corners to earn enough money for rice. His uniform, a hand-me-down from a neighbor's son, never quite fit properly, and the other children noticed everything. Their whispered comments about his appearance and his family's poverty had stung deeply, creating wounds that took years to heal. But Josefina had possessed an almost supernatural ability to see through the surface struggles to the potential within. While other teachers marked him absent and moved on with their lessons, she made it her personal mission to ensure he never fell too far behind. After school, when the building emptied and silence settled over the classrooms, she would patiently guide him through multiplication tables and reading comprehension exercises. Manny remembered one particular afternoon when monsoon rains had flooded the streets, making it impossible for him to walk home. Josefina had stayed with him in the empty classroom, sharing her simple lunch of rice and dried fish while they waited for the waters to recede. She had used that time to tell him stories about successful people who had emerged from humble beginnings, planting seeds of possibility in his young mind that would eventually grow into unwavering determination. The generosity had extended beyond academics. During parent-teacher conferences, when Dionysia couldn't attend because she was working multiple jobs, Josefina never complained or penalized him. Instead, she would write encouraging notes that his mother could read later, always emphasizing his potential rather than his challenges. She understood that poverty was not a choice, but a circumstance that required compassion rather than judgment. As his vehicle continued through the neighborhood, Manny observed children walking to school in pressed uniforms, carrying proper backpacks and lunchboxes. The sight filled him with both joy for their improved circumstances and melancholy for his own lost childhood. These young students would never know the gnawing anxiety of wondering whether they could afford to continue their education, a luxury he had never experienced at their age. His research team had been discreet but thorough in gathering information about Josefina's current situation. She lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment with her daughter Marites and son-in-law Edmundo, both hard-working individuals who struggled to make ends meet despite their best efforts. The cramped living space housed 5 people, including young Bayani and Mayumi, who shared a small bedroom and studied by the light of a single bulb. The reports painted a picture of quiet dignity in the face of financial hardship. Josefina helped care for her grandchildren while their parents worked long hours, continuing her role as an educator even in retirement. She assisted with homework, encouraged their dreams, and provided the same nurturing guidance that had once helped shape a future world champion. Bayani showed exceptional aptitude in mathematics and had expressed interest in engineering, while Mayumi demonstrated remarkable creativity in writing and art. Both children maintained excellent grades despite their challenging circumstances, inheriting their grandmother's belief in education as a pathway to transformation. Tomorrow, everything would change for this family, though they had no idea what was coming. From a discreet distance, Manny watched as the afternoon routine of Josefina's household unfolded with clockwork precision. The small apartment building, weathered by years of tropical storms and scorching sun, stood as a testament to resilience rather than prosperity. Laundry hung from bamboo poles extending from narrow balconies, and the sounds of daily life echoed through thin walls that separated struggling families pursuing their dreams. His vantage point from across the street allowed him to observe without intrusion. Through a second-floor window, he could see Mayumi sitting at a small wooden table, her school books spread before her as she worked diligently on homework assignments. The girl's posture reminded him remarkably of her grandmother during those patient after-school sessions decades ago. Her concentration was absolute, despite the obvious distractions of a crowded living space where privacy was a luxury none could afford. Bayani appeared moments later, returning from what Manny assumed was his part-time job helping at a nearby sari-sari store. Even at 14, the boy carried himself with the weary responsibility of someone forced to grow up too quickly. His school uniform showed signs of careful maintenance, pressed and clean despite obvious age, reflecting the family's determination to preserve dignity regardless of their financial limitations. These observations triggered a flood of parallel memories from Manny's own adolescence. He remembered similar afternoons when he would rush from odd jobs to complete schoolwork by candlelight, fighting exhaustion and hunger while trying to absorb lessons that seemed disconnected from his harsh reality. The difference was that he had been fortunate enough to have Josefina as his advocate, someone who refused to let circumstances define his future. The memory of one particularly difficult period remained crystal clear. His family had been evicted from their small house, forcing them to sleep in an abandoned building with no electricity or running water. Manny had missed several consecutive days of school, too embarrassed to explain his situation to classmates who already viewed him as different. When he finally returned, expecting punishment or ridicule, Josefina had quietly approached him after class. Instead of scolding him for his absences, she had arranged for him to borrow textbooks that he could take home, along with assignments that would help him catch up on missed lessons. She never asked intrusive questions about his living situation, somehow understanding that his pride was already wounded enough. Her discretion had been as valuable as her educational support, allowing him to maintain dignity while accepting help. That same sensitivity had extended to his learning difficulties. Reading had never come easily to him, and mathematical concepts often seemed impossibly abstract when his mind was preoccupied with survival. Rather than highlighting his struggles in front of other students, Josefina had developed creative teaching methods that connected academic concepts to his real-world experiences. She taught him fractions by using examples of dividing small amounts of rice among family members. Multiplication became a tool for calculating potential earnings from various jobs. Geography lessons focused on provinces where he might find better opportunities. Every subject was transformed into something relevant and achievable, building his confidence while expanding his knowledge. Now, watching Bayani and Mayumi navigate their own educational challenges, Manny recognized the same determination that had driven him through those difficult years. The boy's mathematics notebook was filled with neat calculations and problem-solving exercises, while Mayumi's composition papers showed creativity and emotional depth that surpassed her age. Josefina emerged onto the small balcony, hanging freshly washed clothes while supervising her grandchildren's study time through the open window. Her movements were slower now, and her hair had turned completely silver, but her attentive presence remained constant. She embodied the same nurturing vigilance that had once guided a hungry, desperate boy toward an impossible dream. The irony struck him with renewed force. This woman who had invested so much in his education was now watching her own grandchildren face identical obstacles. The cycle of poverty that she had helped him escape was threatening to claim another generation of promising young minds. Her pension, earned through decades of shaping young lives, was insufficient to provide the educational opportunities her own family deserved. Manny understood that tomorrow's surprise would represent more than financial assistance. It would be a recognition of debt that could never be fully repaid, a gesture of gratitude that transcended monetary value. The following morning brought with it a sense of purpose that energized every fiber of Manny's being. In his suite at a modest hotel near the city center, he carefully reviewed the comprehensive scholarship program his foundation had designed specifically for Bayani and Mayumi. The documents spread across his desk represented far more than financial support. They embodied a philosophy of educational empowerment that Josefina had instilled in him decades earlier. His team had worked tirelessly through the night to finalize every detail. The scholarship would cover not only tuition fees for both children through university level, but also books, supplies, uniforms, transportation, and even modest living allowances to ensure that financial pressure never again threatened their academic pursuits. Additional provisions included tutoring support, mentorship programs, and internship opportunities that would connect them with professionals in their chosen fields. The memory of Josefina's teaching philosophy guided every aspect of the program's design. She had never believed in simple charity, but rather in creating opportunities for students to develop their own capabilities. Her approach had always emphasized dignity, self-reliance, and the understanding that education was not a gift to be passively received, but a tool to be actively wielded for personal and community transformation. Manny remembered how she had structured his extra help sessions to build confidence rather than dependency. Instead of simply providing answers, she had taught him to ask better questions. When he struggled with reading comprehension, she had encouraged him to connect written words with his own experiences, making literature relevant to his daily life. Mathematical problems became puzzles to solve rather than obstacles to fear, her influence had extended far beyond academic subjects. Josefina had modeled values that became cornerstones of his character: humility in success, perseverance through adversity, and responsibility toward those still climbing the ladder he had already ascended. She had shown him that true achievement was measured not only by personal accomplishment, but by the positive impact one could have on others facing similar challenges. The scholarship program reflected these same principles. Rather than creating dependency, it was structured to encourage excellence and community involvement. Both children would be required to maintain strong academic performance and participate in community service projects that would help other disadvantaged students. The program would also connect them with successful professionals who could serve as mentors and role models. Manny's foundation director had coordinated with local educational institutions to ensure seamless implementation. The children would have access to the best schools in the region, with additional support systems to help them transition successfully. Counseling services would be available to address any emotional or social challenges that might arise from their changed circumstances. As he prepared for the surprise visit, Manny reflected on the ripple effects of Josefina's investment in his education. Her belief in his potential had not only transformed his own life, but had also enabled him to impact millions of others through his boxing career, political service, and philanthropic efforts. The boy she had nurtured in that small classroom had gone on to represent his country on the world stage, bringing pride and inspiration to an entire nation. Now, through Bayani and Mayumi, that cycle of transformation would continue. These children, given the same opportunities that had once seemed impossible for a young Emmanuel Pacquiao, would have the chance to develop their own talents and eventually contribute to their communities in ways that honored their grandmother's legacy. The afternoon sun filtered through his hotel window as Manny gathered the scholarship documents and prepared to deliver a surprise that would change the trajectory of two young lives forever. The narrow staircase leading to Josefina's apartment creaked under Manny's weight as he climbed toward a reunion that had been decades in the making. Each step brought back vivid memories of countless afternoons when he had walked similar stairs to reach tutoring sessions that would ultimately change the course of his entire life. His heart pounded with an intensity that rivaled his most challenging boxing matches, though this nervous energy was born of anticipation rather than competition. Behind him, his small entourage carried carefully wrapped packages containing the scholarship documents and supplementary materials that would transform the educational prospects of two promising young students. The security team had been instructed to maintain a discreet presence, understanding that this moment required intimacy rather than spectacle. This was not a photo opportunity or publicity event, but a deeply personal expression of gratitude that had been building for 30 years. The afternoon heat made the confined hallway feel oppressive, yet Manny barely noticed the discomfort. His mind was entirely focused on the woman who had seen potential in a ragged, hungry boy when others saw only problems. Josefina had never expected recognition or reward for her kindness. She had simply done what great teachers do, planting seeds of possibility in fertile minds and trusting that time would bring growth. As he reached the second-floor landing, Manny could hear the familiar sounds of family life emanating from behind the wooden door, marked with faded numbers. Children's voices mixed with the gentle guidance of an elderly woman, creating a symphony of domestic harmony that reminded him of his own childhood home during its rare, peaceful moments. The smell of cooking rice and fish drifted through the hallway, triggering memories of shared meals and patient instruction. He paused for a moment, gathering courage for an encounter that would be emotionally overwhelming for both parties. Through the thin walls, he could hear Josefina helping Mayumi with what sounded like a reading assignment, her voice carrying the same patient tone that had once guided him through difficult lessons. The continuity was remarkable. Despite the passage of decades, she remained dedicated to nurturing young minds with the same passion that had defined her teaching career. When he finally knocked on the door, the sudden silence from within was profound. Footsteps approached cautiously, and he knew that Marites was probably checking through the peephole to identify her unexpected visitor. The recognition would be immediate but shocking. Emmanuel Pacquiao was not someone who typically appeared unannounced at modest apartment buildings in General Santos City. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her early 50s whose features clearly resembled her mother. Marites stood frozen for several seconds. her eyes wide with disbelief as she processed the impossible sight before her. Behind her, he could see movement as other family members gathered to investigate the commotion, their curiosity overcoming their caution. Then Josefina appeared, moving slowly with the careful steps of advanced age, but maintaining the dignified posture that had commanded respect in countless classrooms. Her silver hair was neatly arranged, and her simple dress was clean and pressed despite obvious wear. When their eyes met, the years collapsed instantly, and the world champion saw reflected in her face the same kindness and wisdom that had guided him through his darkest moments. Recognition dawned gradually across her weathered features, beginning with confusion and evolving into wonder. Her hand moved instinctively to her heart, as if trying to steady its increased rhythm. The boy she remembered as small and hungry now stood before her as a man whose achievements had brought honor to their entire nation, yet she could still see traces of that eager student who had absorbed her lessons with desperate intensity. Bayani and Mayumi emerged from their small study area, their homework temporarily forgotten, as they witnessed their grandmother's emotional response to this unexpected visitor. The children had certainly seen Manny Pacquiao on television and in newspapers, but his presence in their modest home seemed to belong to the realm of impossible dreams rather than afternoon reality. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken gratitude and memories that bridged the gap between a struggling childhood and an extraordinary adulthood. Everything that would follow, the scholarship announcement, the tears of joy, the transformation of two young lives, began with this single moment of recognition between a student and the teacher who had refused to give up on his potential. The invitation into Josefina's modest home came through gestures rather than words, as emotions had temporarily overwhelmed the family's ability to speak coherently. Marites stepped aside with trembling hands, her eyes glistening with tears of disbelief, while Josefina moved forward with the grace that had always characterized her interactions with students, regardless of their social status or achievements. The small living space revealed a family's determined efforts to maintain dignity despite financial constraints. The furniture was old but meticulously cared for, with hand-sewn covers hiding worn upholstery and family photographs arranged proudly on shelves constructed from repurposed wooden crates. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that comes from careful attention rather than expensive cleaning products. Manny's trained eye immediately noticed details that spoke volumes about the family's values and priorities. School certificates and academic awards covered one entire wall, creating a gallery of educational achievement that spanned generations. Bayani's mathematics competition ribbons hung beside Mayumi's creative writing certificates, while older documents celebrated Josefina's teaching honors and Marite's high school graduation. The familiar aroma of simple but nourishing food filled the air, reminding him of countless afternoons when Josefina had shared her modest lunch with hungry students. A pot of rice simmered on a small gas burner, accompanied by dried fish and vegetables that represented the staple diet of working-class Filipino families. The smell triggered powerful memories of shared meals and patient instruction that had sustained him through his most difficult periods. Bayani and Mayumi remained frozen near their study table, their homework assignments forgotten, as they processed the surreal experience of having a global celebrity enter their humble home. Their wide eyes reflected the same mixture of awe and confusion that their grandmother had displayed moments earlier. The textbooks spread across their workspace told the story of dedicated students pursuing education despite obvious financial limitations. Josefina's emotional response was profound yet controlled, reflecting decades of teaching experience that had taught her to manage overwhelming situations with grace. Her weathered hand shook slightly as she gestured for Manny to sit in the family's best chair, a gesture of respect that transported him back to childhood classrooms where she had always treated every student with equal dignity. The wall clock ticked steadily in the background, marking time that seemed suspended as past and present converged in this small apartment. Through the open window, sounds of neighborhood life continued normally. Unaware that a moment of extraordinary significance was unfolding just meters away, children played in the courtyard below, while vendors called out their wares, creating a soundtrack of ordinary life that made Manny's presence seem even more remarkable. Edmundo appeared from what must have been the kitchen area, his work clothes suggesting he had just returned from his job at a local construction site. His calloused hands and sun-weathered face told the story of a man who provided for his family through honest physical labor, earning just enough to maintain their modest lifestyle without the luxury of savings or educational funds. The contrast between this humble dwelling and the luxury that now surrounded Manny's daily life was stark. Yet he felt more at home here than in many of the palatial venues where he had been entertained as a celebrity. This apartment represented authenticity, family values, and the kind of genuine human connections that wealth and fame often complicated rather than enhanced. As the initial shock began to subside, Manny could see questions forming in the family's eyes. They wondered why the most famous athlete in Philippine history had appeared at their door, what purpose had brought him to their neighborhood, and whether this encounter was somehow connected to the educational struggles they faced daily. The moment had come to reveal the reason for his visit. With hands that had once delivered championship-winning punches, now trembling with emotion, Manny reached for the carefully prepared envelope that contained documents capable of transforming two young lives forever. The weight of the scholarship papers seemed minimal compared to the magnitude of their potential impact, yet holding them felt like carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire family. Josefina's eyes followed his movements with the same attentive focus she had once given to lesson plans and student assessments. Her intuitive understanding, sharpened by decades of reading young faces and anticipating their needs, seemed to sense that this visit carried significance beyond a simple reunion. The tension in the small room was palpable as family members waited for an explanation that would make sense of this extraordinary encounter. Manny's voice, calm when he finally spoke, carried the weight of 30 years of gratitude that had been waiting for the perfect moment of expression. He explained how her influence had shaped not only his academic development, but his entire approach to life, success, and responsibility toward others. Every achievement in his remarkable career could be traced back to foundations she had helped establish during those crucial formative years. The scholarship documents he presented were comprehensive beyond anything the family could have imagined. Full educational support for both Bayani and Mayumi, extending from their current grade levels through university graduation, including all expenses that might otherwise prevent them from pursuing their dreams. The program also included mentorship opportunities, internships, and connections to professional networks that would support their career development. Bayani's eyes widened as he processed the implications for his engineering aspirations, while Mayumi's artistic dreams suddenly seemed achievable rather than merely wishful thinking. The financial barriers that had loomed like insurmountable mountains in their young minds were dissolving before their eyes, replaced by pathways toward futures they had barely dared to imagine. Marites collapsed into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the realization that her children's educational struggles were ending in this single transformative moment. The constant worry about tuition fees, textbook costs, and transportation expenses that had kept her awake countless nights was being lifted from her shoulders by an act of extraordinary generosity rooted in genuine gratitude. Edmundo stood motionless, his weathered hands clenched as he fought to maintain composure in the face of emotions too powerful for immediate expression. Years of working multiple jobs while dreaming of better opportunities for his stepchildren had culminated in this moment of deliverance that seemed too good to be real. But it was Josefina's reaction that moved Manny most profoundly. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she understood that her investment in a struggling young student had returned to bless her own family in ways she could never have anticipated. The kindness she had shown without expectation of reward was being repaid through opportunities that would impact generations yet to come. The scholarship represented more than financial assistance. It embodied values that Josefina had instilled through her teaching philosophy. Excellence would be expected and supported, community service was required, and the recipients would be encouraged to eventually help other students facing similar challenges. The cycle of educational empowerment would continue, expanding the positive impact of her original investment in Pacquiao. As the family absorbed the reality of their changed circumstances, Manny felt a profound sense of completion. The debt of gratitude that had motivated him throughout his career was finally being acknowledged in the most meaningful way possible. Two promising young students would now have the same opportunities that had once seemed impossible for a barefoot boy from the streets of General Santos City. The late afternoon sun filtering through their small window seemed brighter, illuminating faces transformed by hope and possibility that had materialized from decades of patient nurturing and unwavering belief in human potential. As the golden hour approached and shadows began to lengthen across the small apartment, Manny knew his time with this remarkable family was drawing to a close. The scholarship documents had been carefully reviewed, contact information exchanged, and implementation details explained, yet the emotional resonance of this encounter would extend far beyond any paperwork or administrative procedures. Josefina sat quietly in her chair, the scholarship papers resting in her lap like precious treasures that validated a lifetime of dedication to education. Her weathered fingers traced the official seals and signatures that guaranteed her grandchildren's academic futures, still struggling to believe that such extraordinary fortune had emerged from a simple act of kindness performed decades earlier without expectation of reward. The transformation in Bayani and Mayumi was already visible, though the scholarship would not officially begin until the next academic year. Their posture had changed, their eyes brightened with possibilities that had been merely dreams just hours before. The burden of educational uncertainty that had weighed on their young shoulders was replaced by anticipation for opportunities that would allow their talents to flourish without financial constraints. Manny understood that this moment represented more than the fulfillment of a personal obligation. It exemplified the profound impact that dedicated educators could have on entire communities when their efforts were recognized and replicated. Josefina's investment in a single struggling student had created ripple effects that would now extend to her own family and eventually to countless others who would benefit from the continued cycle of educational empowerment. The late afternoon light filtering through their modest window illuminated faces that reflected hope, gratitude, and the quiet dignity that characterized families who had maintained their values despite economic challenges. This small apartment had become a sanctuary where dreams were nurtured and potential was recognized, continuing the same tradition that had once transformed a hungry boy into a global champion. As Manny prepared to leave, he reflected on the profound symmetry of this encounter. The woman who had shaped his character and academic foundation was now witnessing the fruits of her labor, return to bless her own descendants. The scholarship would ensure that Bayani and Mayumi received the same quality education that had been beyond reach for their grandmother's generation, breaking cycles of limited opportunity that had persisted for decades. The neighborhood sounds that drifted through their open windows remained unchanged, yet everything within this small dwelling had been transformed by an afternoon that would be remembered and recounted for generations. Children still played in the courtyard below, vendors continued calling their wares, and daily life proceeded normally, unaware that extraordinary change had just occurred in their midst. Manny's departure was accompanied by promises of continued connection and support that extended beyond the formal scholarship program. Regular check-ins would ensure successful academic progress, while mentorship opportunities would provide guidance for career development and personal growth. The relationship between benefactor and recipients would be built on mutual respect rather than dependency, reflecting the same values that Josefina had modeled throughout her teaching career. Walking down the narrow staircase that had brought him to this reunion, Manny felt a profound sense of completion that no boxing victory or political achievement had ever provided. The debt of gratitude that had motivated him for 30 years was finally being acknowledged in the most meaningful way possible, through opportunities that would impact generations yet to come. The circle was complete, yet it was also beginning anew. Two promising students would now receive the same chances that had once seemed impossible for Pacquiao, and they would eventually be encouraged to extend similar opportunities to others facing educational challenges. As his vehicle pulled away from the neighborhood where his transformation had begun, Manny carried with him the satisfaction of knowing that the most important victory of his career had nothing to do with championships or titles, but with honoring the teacher who had believed in his potential when no one else would. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.